Hello, my name is Will Buchanan, and I'm walking across the country to New Hampshire on a project called the Walk for Liberty. Today, in fact, is day 135 of the Walk for Liberty, and it's September 15th, 2008. Poor turtle got flipped over and his shell is partially cracked. Interestingly, even though his shell is upside down, it looks like he managed to right himself within it. However, it doesn't look like his legs can touch the ground any longer to walk. I'm assuming he hasn't just decided to sunbathe, so I'm going to try to flip him over. Hopefully the incident goes better than the one with the injured bird back in the Day 67 Part 1 episode. He's injured pretty badly. It looks like he might have gone back in his shell, mostly. I'm just going to move him to the side of the road. He was still alive when I got to him because his eyes were moving, but I think he might have died by the time I left. Back in high school and college, I used to be really into recycling. I thought it was important and your duty as somebody who cared about the environment to recycle anything you possibly could, including paper, plastics, glass, and aluminum cans. I believed what I was told, that it made sense to recycle all those things. After researching it some, though, I didn't find any conclusive evidence one way or another that it makes environmental sense to recycle all of those things. One thing which is pretty clear to me is that it does make economic and environmental sense to recycle aluminum cans. But as far as the other three, paper, plastics, and glass, I couldn't find any conclusive studies which looked at the entire life history of a product and took into account all the different factors, including, for example, the amount of energy it takes for trucks to haul the product around in one form or another, as far as whether it makes more environmental sense to recycle those three things or not. And when I'm talking about whether it makes environmental sense, I'm referring to the amount of energy used and therefore to the amount of pollution created. One thing I do know, however, is that government is not the best entity to be deciding that question. Whether it makes sense environmentally to recycle really is synonymous with whether or not it makes sense economically to recycle. At least if all land were private and people had to deal with the consequences of infringing on somebody else's private property by polluting on it. The economics of the question takes all factors into account, including the cost of the human capital involved one way or the other. And it inherently factors in the cost and thus the amount of energy used, and therefore also the amount of pollution created. With government, the question about recycling is a political, not an environmental one. And there's no guarantee that who's on top politically will make the best environmental or economic decision. And since government is, by nature, one size fits all, if the wrong decision is made, everyone suffers. The free market is much better equipped than government to make the best economic and thus also environmental decision about recycling. One key factor in the free market is what it costs to produce something. And the cost translates directly into the amount of all manner of resources used in producing it. I'm not saying the free market is perfect at making the best decision every single time. However, it is much better equipped and more objective at making a better decision than the government. With government, the recycling issue, like most other issues, ultimately comes down to a matter of control and revenue collection. Control, for example, in trying to force you to participate in curbside recycling programs. And don't get me started on those can and bottle deposits which states force businesses to collect from you. In the free market, a business has the highest possible incentive to use the least amount of energy practical, that is, saving money. And the question of whether to use a particular recycled material or not will be solved naturally by whether it costs less and therefore uses less resources. I walked about 19 2/3 miles. Here's my current location. This is Will Buchanan for Amazon.walkforliberty.com, signing off. On and off liquors.